I'm happy to be here today and standing in front of those who maybe those who are shaping or take a big part in shaping the future we will live in. I will just add some background information why I thought about why I thought it could be interesting for you to listen to me or to what I thought I could say here. I just finishing my master's degree in economics and philosophy, and I'm preparing for a Ph.D. project at the same time, which will deal with property rights and the emerging technology of the blockchain and distributed ledger. And the reason why I started to study economics together with philosophy was, of course, the financial crisis, which happened almost 10 years ago, and which made me deeply unsure about the economic system and the structures our interaction with each other is embedded in. And so I took several additional lessons in philosophy and history in order to learn more about what actually has happened for the system to be like this. As a part of that engagement, so to say, I became part of a student initiative, which is called the International Student Initiative for Plural Economics. It's worldwide by now, I think, and we are trying to transform the economic subject and the way it's being taught towards a more pluralistic version, because at the moment it's a bit like one monolithic theory which tries to explain everything, and there's no other point of view allowed, really. Another network I'm connected to is the social banking network, which is quite strong in Germany, but also in other European countries, and they are trying since many decades already to do banking a bit more social and sustainable. So my first personal experience with the blockchain was because of Bitcoin, of course, and it was on a conference about the nature of money and how it interacts with the way we think. And there was an economist who said that the nature of money had always been the same, more or less, in representing a value until Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, that radically changed, and he didn't go into the detail why it really has changed, but it made me curious, and I started to look into the technology and try to understand what is actually happening and why. So today I want to talk I want to talk about how the freedom of the future generations who will probably use the achievements we reach today, how this freedom will be defined. So for that, I will grasp on the concept of freedom and how it has historically developed. I will kind of zoom out a bit from this very practical and really to the reality of the present technology, all those subjects. And I will try to zoom out and look on a larger scale how the concept of freedom, which we want to establish today, how it has developed. And I want to take you on a historical journey so that we can explore that together. But first of all, I would like you to think 100 years ahead and try to imagine what it will be like for the people interacting with the blockchain. Maybe all transactions will be public, and the people that will have an equal and fair access to the financial system. And maybe then the people will look back to you and all those people who started inventing this technology and talk about this small group on a mailing list thinking about economic freedom and how it could be established. So maybe you could just, for a minute or so, think about what you think the challenges of the blockchain and the concept of freedom and the whole technology which is underlying can be and will be in 100 years, and maybe are already. And maybe you can just take 1 minute to exchange yourself with the neighbor, and then I will continue. Thank you. Hello? Okay. Hello? Okay. Thank you. Great. I'm quite sure there's a lot to say to that subject, and I am also sure there will be a lot of breaks in between where you can carry on. Hello? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There's a small part I still want to fill, but I'm sure there's a lot to say to this subject, and as far as I know, there's a lot of breaks where you can keep talking about that. So I think one of the key challenges about freedom is that it's not quite clear how individual freedom and on a collective scale can be realized. And I want to dig into the first establishing of an individual freedom, and the first one to think about that. So it basically starts with the Glorious Revolution and the Industrial Age, which was 300 years ago. So the philosophic movement at that time is called, or is known today as Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment is, I think, best known to be one of the most important influence on our present freedom of dogma and ideology. So what's curious about the Enlightenment is the fact that the people at that time were suddenly confronted with a world where freedom was transferred to the individual. That wasn't possible before, because people for ages had to live in a community in order to sustain themselves. And the Christian church, of course, was supporting this kind of way of living, because there are virtues of love, hope, and faith had to be practiced and had to be exercised in this community. So the first to ponder about the individual freedom was probably the British physician John Locke. He was encouraged by members of the Whig Party to write a philosophical thesis which would question the dominant monarchy at the time. And among other writers who had dedicated themselves to that subject of freedom, which was becoming more and more important at that time, was Thomas Hobbes. Maybe you've heard of him. He had just finished his Leviathan a few decades before. And in there, he proclaims a natural condition of a war of every man against every man. So the only solution to this condition was a totalitarian state, which would have the control of the executive power and restrict the individual freedom in order for some collective well-being. And that wasn't what the democratic movement at the time was hoping for, because their vision of a free society would see the individual in a far more dominant position. So the Whig Party managed to get access to the House of Commons and played a most very important role in overthrowing King James II. And they declared the Bill of Rights, which is the earliest parliamentary constitution. Now, why is that important? John Locke had written a book about the three rights of the individual. And he wanted every individual to have a right to live, a right to be free, and a right for estate. So those rights weren't granted by the government, though. They were given to the individual by birth, and that was the key difference to the way freedom had been thought before. And this kind of natural condition wasn't looking for a totalitarian state anymore. So the Whig Party had the right groundwork, kind of, for their paroles to spread among the electorate, and for making people understand why it is freedom that we need. So even though the English Revolution resulted in violent counterforces and couldn't really settle down and take root, it came, the idea of individual freedom persisted, and it came to blossom again 100 years later in the French Revolution. So then the Europe liberal movement kind of culminated, really, and spread the seeds all over the place, and suddenly everybody wanted to have freedom. So of course this is not the culmination point of my speech today, because I want to, well, I know that many of you, and I think that's the reason why we have this conference, are quite critical towards the state we find society in today, and they don't find individual freedom fully realized. And from an anarchistic point of view, any form of power is toxic to the free individual. But the question is, what is the natural condition for the individual to be free? And this was a question quite a lot of philosophers thought about during the time of the industrial age and the Enlightenment. And I want to present to you some ideas of philosophers which are not so present and which are not so prominent, I think. So, what does an individual need to be free? One advice when dealing with terms like freedom is to look back at how the concept of freedom actually evolved. And if you look at the root of the word freedom, then we have the Indo-German word free, which meant so much as used as I don't know what it meant, but it was used at the same, well, the old German language, for example, it meant the same as friend and peace, which are related in the etymological root. So originally, when people were not in a condition of war, they could call their neighbors a friend, and if they were friends, they could build a space of peace around them. And this was the definition of freedom. This kind of concept changed during the late Middle Ages, and it was the task of the dawning Enlightenment to grasp the new kind of freedom, which was on the individual level, which wasn't so much based on a community anymore. And it was Immanuel Kant who wrote the famous essay, What is Enlightenment and What Does It Want? And in this essay, he formulates one of the, I think, well, this sentence is known actually, sentence that enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. Now, what I find curious about the sentence is that suddenly Kant thinks that there is some self-incurred restrictions to individual freedom. I mean, the French Revolution was just fighting off the ties of feudalism, and this was were external forces restricting the individual from being free. And still, Kant thought that something was missing, and he wondered what was still missing and what the individual needed in order to become really free. His key slogan he formulated was the slogan "Sapere aude" in Latin, which means "dare to know." So Kant is best known for his critique of reason, and his vision of freedom, of course, saw the individual to be capable of reason. But I wonder, and many people at the time wondered, if they actually understood what Kant meant, how to accomplish reason. And there's some also very prominent figure who was not quite, who didn't quite disagree with Immanuel Kant. And this was Friedrich Schiller, another German philosopher. He was arguing against Immanuel Kant, but he wasn't disagreeing on the concept of reason. He was disagreeing about how it should be acquired. Schiller was heavily disappointed with the French Revolution as well. And, but he thought that Kant's demand for the individual to be reasonable was a kind of totalitarian, be wise and act reasonably scheme. So the individual didn't really try for himself and on his own to be free, but was supposed to be free in order for any freedom of society or anything. So that wasn't what Schiller had imagined. And in his writings, he explains what it actually needs for an individual to be free. But let us hold on for a minute and look back. I mean, we have the Enlightenment along with the Glorious Revolution. And suddenly, the political philosophy at the time was trying to understand how individual freedom could consist and exist in a society. So 100 years later, the French Revolution happens, and suddenly there is society finds itself in a state of freedom where there's no absolute state, no monarchy anymore. Still, some philosophers aren't convinced this is going to be the state we want. And today, we are still not in a condition, although there's no monarchy or absolutism anymore, where we could say the individual rights are completely granted. So, I just have to. So instead of looking on the outward obstacles to overcome, like monarchy or absolutism, they turned to the inside of the individual. They were looking for the way how how not a society on a whole level, but how the individual itself could become free. And this wasn't just by shaking off the ties of absolutism, but it was by becoming by getting a bigger access to one's reason. But according to Schiller, and this he tries to explain it in a very, I think, complex way, reason is very intellectual. It's just something you think about, and or you do by thinking. And his vision for freedom and for reason to realize was going through the heart. And he was looking for the heart of the human being to get into a condition of really wanting to be free. And for that, he chose something that's not really commonly not really connected with freedom as a key element in bringing the human heart to this situation where it wants to be free. And this is education. Because education is a way of caring for, usually for children, but it doesn't stop there, for caring for a human being and trying to see a condition growing in that human being, that it wants more than just what's there. So the philosophical group Kant and Schiller belong to is called as German Idealism. So it's really a small group, and it's, I think, not very popular. But of course, the names of Kant is known, and Schiller maybe as well. But I thought their concept of freedom has never been as actual as it is today. So I was. I was wanting to show you something about that. So maybe the French Revolution resulted in some changes we can be really happy about. But at the same time, there's a sour aftertaste left with the modern state, which still doesn't mind to act in a totalitarian way, although there is really no absolutism anymore. Today there's a lot of movement towards a political and economic structure which tries to set the condition right for the individual to become free. And although I think this is really important, I think there's something else which still we need to keep in our mind. And this kind of freedom doesn't look only for a structural change, but also for a different way to care for oneself and to care for others. And maybe for inner freedom to maybe even inner freedom will be an individual condition where a free society will follow. So I have a last question for you before I will stop talking. And this is what inner freedom means to you and what you understand from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Yeah, thank you, David. Are there any questions from our public? No, there are no questions. I think people are already in a hurry to move to Fabrika, where the last two panels will start soon, but I can see some.
Question. Who do you consider to be more free? The person who doesn't know that there is something more that they could strive for, but someone else is barring them from achieving that? Or the person who doesn't know that there is something more, but they know their immediate surroundings, they know the beauty of the sun, of the moon, of the grass, the water, of the love of their neighbor, of the love of their family members. They have no notion of there being a huge, gigantic world that's awaiting them and waiting for them to expand into the world. Who is more free? The person who knows there is more and possibly can't get to it? and not really enjoying, and not for that reason, for knowing, they're not really as much focusing and enjoying on their life that they have, or the person who doesn't know that there is more to want?
Good question, because I think the question is, and I think that was what happened in the Enlightenment, that suddenly people questioned the surroundings, and after that, only after that, there could evolve something like the claim for society to be free. So I think the process of becoming conscious of the way, I mean, it is idealistic in its own way to even claim the individual to be free, and this ideal comes with a vision and with an well, a wish how society should be. And if you don't know, then you don't care. So even if you are suppressed and you still feel good, then there's no need to be free. Only if you care and only if you want something to change. I think maybe that's the starting point of being free. And it's an individual, I mean, it's an inner process. So maybe the inner process is, the big philosophical question is there something in the outside first or in the inside? And it's like a egg and a hen question, but yeah, that's another proof that the individual, that the claim for freedom begins also with the process of consciousness.
Just a quick comment. I think your concept of freedom actually is very similar to that expressed by the professor in the book The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. He describes himself as a rational anarchist. One of the quotes, he says, "I am free no matter what rules surround me. If I find them tolerable, I tolerate them. If I find them too obnoxious, I break them. I am free because I know that I alone am morally responsible for everything I do."
I don't know him, but it sounds like a really modern way of interpreting what the obstacles to either outer freedom or inner freedom are. So thank you. I maybe just will talk to you later to see who he is.
Could you elaborate further on what humanism means for anarchists or people striving for an anarchist society? I just don't really know that much about humanism.
Sorry, I didn't get the first part.
Could you elaborate further on what the importance of humanism for anarchists? So I'm very familiar with anarchism and libertarianism, but I'm missing what humanism means for this in terms of that. Is that what you're trying to say?
How liberalism and anarchism relates to humanism.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think there is some discussion about, and I think you could say they are quite opposing, because the humanists were trying to, well, it's very difficult to say who are the humanists, because maybe some humanists wouldn't agree with Kant and would see a free society like today as free. But as I see it, there's a strong tendency for liberation movements, or for the liberating theory, well, like a neoliberalism, for example, to see freedom as a concept which is where the individual doesn't really have to have an inner activity in order for the situation to be realized, for the freedom to be realized. Anarchistic is different because there's different concepts of anarchy as well. There's the individual anarchy, there's the collective anarchy, and they have different concepts of how authority should look like. Because anarchy means really without authority, and it's difficult to really have a clear concept what that should look like. If there's still informal and unconscious process of hierarchy and of people like putting themselves in a relation to someone else which is not on the same eye level. And so this is my question to anarchy, but I see in the neoliberalism and there's on the border between neoliberalism and anarchy, there's this liberation. What's it called? The libertarians. And well, yeah, I'm not sure how they see the inner activity of the individual in their free society.
Regarding the Enlightenment and natural rights, you think it's still relevant to talk about natural rights as they were processed by the Enlightenment thinkers and Thomas Aquinas first, because they were derived by God? So how do you justify the existence of natural rights? Mm-hmm. And do you think it's still relevant to talking things on those terms in the 21st century?
Yeah, that's a huge question as well. And today, probably, the concept, Locke's concept of a natural right was really taken from, everyone took it and used it for their own theory. But the question is there a natural condition where there is no society and where there is not a limited amount of a kind of whatever community? Or is it, does it even, what the natural condition Locke was thinking about, he took it from the Bible. So he was thinking about paradise and really a condition which no human living anymore has experienced. And I think, especially when we're talking about rights, that rights are granted. And maybe there's God granting us a right to live. I would agree with that maybe, but everything else, so freedom and especially property, those are rights which don't exist on their own. Well, maybe they do, but it's always saying, we are saying this is a right you have. So in the moment we say that, it's not natural, it's kind of cultural.
But if you're saying, the thing is, if you're saying they're natural,
yeah,
they are natural regardless of what you think. So they are granted by someone.
Yeah.
And if you don't admit they are granted by God, who grants them? Does nature grant those rights to you? And why exactly does it grant it to humans and doesn't grant it to whales, or what? It's the rationality that defines it, that makes them natural, or are in some way all rights given by society, by the other individuals in their understanding of each other's rights.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think. Well, that's a question. Who's giving me a right if I am born? Is it my parents, or is it my genetic code, or is it a God? I don't know. It's a question to ponder about. But it's quite a very the most elemental level to build up a theory of freedom, and to ask oneself, what condition are we going from when putting a concept of freedom on it, or putting a concept of totalitarianism on it, and yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your talk, very interesting. Your description of freedom seems a little bit thin, in that it's freedom from, but not freedom to. Could you talk a little bit about positive freedom, positive liberty, the ability to act, because you can be free from restraint, but if you have no money, you'll never be a businessman, that kind of stuff. You need freedom to be able to empower yourself.
Yeah, I thought a lot about how money relates with freedom, and usually I think my conclusion was that finally our vision or our longing for money is an enabler for something to do. But in the moment of the moment the money becomes something which is the only thing we want in order, and no matter what comes or what I will do with it, it is not so much the freedom to do something anymore. But those are the main concepts of freedom, of course, and I didn't want to put them so much in an opposing sense, because historical changes show that the concept of negative freedom, which tries to find a situation where all restraints are put away, this is the freedom the people were longing for in the French Revolution. And the positive freedom, if one really tries to realize it, I think this is what comes from the individual, and which is also, it has to do something with being able to be free. So it is something social, because someone puts you, someone enables you to be free. Money isn't someone. Money is like a thing you have to do something. Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
So I agree what you said about money, that once you chase it, it became a goal. Do you believe that a society without money, like gift economy or a Star Trek kind, abundant society, can exist, and would you have more freedom there? I mean, I know it's a theoretical, maybe not practical question, but
yeah,
can it be?
That's a really interesting question, which was one of the key topics on this conference I was talking about, where I first heard about Bitcoin, where there was explored how the nature of money and the inventing of money, how it historically interacts with the people and also with the human being becoming more sophisticated in a way. Because there are some anthropologists who say this is quite close, this connection, like David Graeber, for example. But you can also see that the first development, mathematical science, it always dealt with money. There's the Fibonacci, he wrote the book Libor Baki, and it's 95% about economic transaction. So money is really a strong, I think it had a strong impact on the way we think, especially when we talk about rationality, because money is always more or less, so you always can choose between something which is better. And I think the solution to a society which is using money in the wrong way is not directly to abolish any money, but to make conscious what does money with me, what does it make with me, and how does it serve the needs the society has. This is what you do.
So I can see no more questions, so thank you again, David.
Thank you.